So, first story of tonight is BYD. So, in case you guys don't know what BYD is, it's a Chinese EV manufacturer, electric vehicles. And BYD just introduced a new vehicle called the Seagull, which supposedly gets around 300 kilometers of range. So, not too much range. But the attractive part is that it only costs 9,700 US dollars, which, granted, per capita income in China is a lot lower compared to countries like Canada and the United States. But still, China is becoming more and more developed as the years go by, and their rate of growth is much faster than Canada or the United States or any of the Western countries. So people are getting richer, but we're seeing kind of EVs and stuff like this getting cheaper and cheaper. I personally, I think that if there was a vehicle that was available in, let's say, Canada for around 10,000 US dollars, so that would work out to be around, maybe 12 to 13,000 Canadian dollars. If a vehicle was around that price, an electric vehicle, and it could get 300 kilometers of range, I think that would be super popular, right? But because it's a Chinese company, BYD is a Chinese company, and like Canada, the United States are kind of locked in a trade war with China. There's a lot of like political blockages to maybe getting that vehicle here. But on that note, clearly it's possible to do it for such a low price, right? So, do you think that, like, why can't Canada do EVs, right? Like, there's no EV brands, or there's no car brands in China, in Canada, as far as I'm aware, at all, right? So, what's preventing Canada from achieving a goal like this, like making an EV and making it cheap? Because if we see China's been able to do it for a long time, and if we even look at the United States with Tesla, although they're not quite that cheap, the Model 3 has been coming down in price drastically. And also the US government's kind of helping with that as well by giving out subsidies. So I think the cheapest state you can get a Tesla is in Colorado, which I think at one point, with the rebates and all the tax benefits you're going to get, it's like you can get a Tesla Model 3 for under 40,000 US dollars, which it's like, pretty low considering that it's going to be on par with a lot of gasoline options, right? So, I want to toss a question back to you guys. What do you think is like kind of the blockage of Canada being a player on the electric vehicle kind of manufacturing space, or just pushing electric vehicles and getting electric vehicles into more people's hands in the first place? And maybe you could take it from another angle as well. Maybe you could argue that we shouldn't be going down that space. We should just be relying on other countries because we're not good at it. So I'm just curious to hear what you guys think, right? So let me toss the question back to you guys. What is wrong with the Canadian car manufacturer industry?
I think the Canadian car manufacturing industry is just a little too slow. Um, it's like when other countries do specific things, we take a little bit longer before we get them over here. Um, and on top of the matter, in fact, I don't think there's a lot of EV charging stations around here in like Canada in general versus the States, especially in like California. So I think in general, it's just a little too early. And as previously mentioned before, I think most people are pretty much opting for hybrid options, if not just gasoline options, just because at this moment in time, it's a little more efficient and too early. But that's what I think as of right now.
All right, Tristan?
I think it's also important to remember that it's a lot less practical in a larger country like Canada for something with a shorter range. So having only 300 kilometers, like that, for most of your driving shouldn't be a problem. But if you're buying only one vehicle, you're going to want something that can do more than that, or can be, you know, increased, have the range increased substantially for the without a significant increase in the amount of time, right? So I think that one, like, even if you had a car with 300 range also, I'm not sure what BND BYD does for protection about like the battery cells deteriorating. So if 300 is the cap and then it just gets worse from there, I could see it also being a bit of a problem on that front where you buy it for with 300 and then at some point it just stops being at 300 and then now you can't go very far with it, especially with Canadian winters being so brutal on batteries. I'm not. I would think it'd be pretty difficult. And then, with regards to our industry itself, it's for car manufacturing. Most of our car manufacturing in Canada seems to be uh, American companies, not Canadian companies or anything. So it's basically we're just using we're not getting as much investment into those. I don't think so. I think that's going to be a bit of a stopper on that front.
Well, that's the kind of follow-up question, right? Like, do you think that that is kind of like a problem? Like, should we be going down the pathway of, making a Canadian car manufacturing industry, right? So the reason why I bring it up is because I think with EVs especially, you need natural resources, right? You need certain amounts of metal to make the battery. So these batteries are made from minerals like nickel, like iron, cobalt, stuff like that. And Canada is known for being one of the world's richest resource-rich country, right? So it's also one of the richest countries, like in general, right? If you look at it on a per capita basis. So I think we both have the talent. Like we have a lot of high tech people here as well. So we have the talent, we have the natural resources, and like we don't have to build cars to like export to the world. We could just build cars to use for ourselves too, right? And eh, as what you said about like the 300 kilometer range, it is a bit low. I would agree with you on that. However, I think with the price point of around 10,000 US dollars, I think that fits into a very good niche, right? So it's going to be used for certain use cases like just commuting around the city or getting groceries. And I don't know about you, but like I haven't driven more than 300 kilometers in a day in like a very long time, because these days, like what I use my car for is just to like go get groceries or go for a coffee from time to time. And like I work from home, so I don't need to commute to work. But even if I did need to commute to work, hopefully you live within 150 kilometers of where you work, right? Because otherwise there'll be quite the long commute. So 150 kilometers there, 150 back. I feel like even if you were to use it for commuting, it would be enough for most people for 90% of use cases. And yeah, I agree. Like if you're trying to go on a road trip, it'll be like pretty annoying to have to stop and charge it all the time. But it's I don't think it's like really worth it to like it'll be worth it for a lot of people to just, buy this car just so that they can get to work, right? It's like designed for people who just want a car to get them around and they don't care about the advanced features and all that stuff. And I just wish we had an option like that in Canada, right? Which like we don't. If you want a car with that only costs $10,000, you're gonna have to buy like a really old used Corolla or something like that, probably, right? But I wish we had something that was like a new option that cost that low that like people can opt for their specific use cases if they just want something to get around. But what do you guys think about that?
I think like standalone, like 97 like $1,000 USD is like a really nice price. And then like you said, if you're like someone who's just going to the grocery store or like wants to grab a cup of coffee that's super duper close, like 300 kilometers, yeah, I guess it's fine. I think the only like issue is that there aren't many charging stations around, so you would have to charge just locally, just via your house or something. But it also, like, I feel like you're right too. It isn't really fair to us Canadians that we don't have this option versus like other countries having this option, but I guess it is what it is. And I just think it's still a little too early for EVs, like in this matter. But I mean, there is hopefully a space for it in the future that can like prosper with like better infrastructure in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, well, with regards to the charging stations, actually, like most of these cars are designed to charge overnight at home. I know some people live in condos, so maybe that's not like that would be a barrier, right? Like if your condo doesn't support charging, but you know, there has been talks about different companies moving to NACS, which is it's an acronym for North American Standard. It's like Tesla's supercharging port, essentially, that other companies are using it and adapting their ports to that standard. So in the future, you could potentially pull up to a Tesla supercharging station, and if your car uses NACS, then it plugs right in, and you can just pay Tesla for and use their infrastructure. Right. So yeah, I think there's solutions around there, and it's just like I kind of think about maybe when people move from horses to cars, there weren't like gas stations around initially, right? Like somebody had to go and build a gas station. So it's like we can probably e- vastly expand our charging infrastructure and make it a lot better if more people got cars. But it's kind of like electric cars. I mean, but it's kind of like a vicious cycle, right? Where if not enough people get electric cars, then there's no like kind of momentum to expand that infrastructure. And as a result, nobody gets electric cars. So it's kind of like I think the government has the opportunity to kind of disrupt that cycle by pushing for an expansion of the infrastructure. And we'll talk about that later. But Tristan, do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I definitely think that your point about I want to kind of make a comment about your point with like horse and buggy versus like the first gas cars, etc. And I think one thing to remember on that front is that there is a over a
Could you rewind? I think you cut out at the most important part.
Oh no. Yeah, so I think so with regards to the stable versus like gas car thing, I think the one factor you're not really taking into account with that comparison with regards to EVs versus gas cars is that there is a clear advantage to the car versus the horse and buggy, right? It's significantly faster, it's significantly easier to maintain in the sense of like you don't have to feed it. Like you give it gas, but like that's a lot easier than the horse that needs a lot more care and needs more rest, etc. So I think the problem with EVs is that it's harder for us to incentivize people to build out the infrastructure because there is not such a clear this is superior to gas, because there are a lot of downsides to the EVs currently still. So until all of that gets figured out, maybe like the range, or the big ones are the range or the speed at which it can be recharged. If those two items can get figured out so that they're basically on par with gas vehicles, I think EVs will suddenly catapult into much better. But until then, I think it's really difficult for EVs to become anything more than like more of like a commuting vehicle, right?
Yeah, and I think I agree with that. Those are some pretty good points. So what you're saying is basically like the hop from horses to cars initially is a much greater hop than the hop from internal combustion to electric vehicles, right? And yeah, I can kind of see that. Personally, I still drive gasoline cars, right? And the reason for that is not because I don't like EVs. In fact, I want to switch to an EV. However, it's just my gasoline car works, and I don't like need to. I can't justify spending a ton of money to upgrade to an electric car when I already have a gas car that works and is relatively cheap. Like I drive a Volkswagen Jetta, so it's a relatively cheap car to refuel as well. So yeah, I definitely do get your points about just the incentive right now is not enough to upgrade, especially when electric vehicles are still on average more expensive than gasoline vehicles, right? So I totally get that. But with that, I wanted to maybe move on to our next topic, which ties into this topic that we're talking about right now, which is how what the government can do to kind of motivate this transition to EVs, because we're all environmentalists here, right? We all care about the environment, and EVs do have the potential to be more environmentally friendly. Now, I know like people are going to push back and be like, it depends on where you get the power from. But here in Canada, I think, or at least in Ontario, we get most of the power in Ontario from nuclear and from hydro. So it's a very clean energy mix. So if you're driving an electric vehicle in Ontario, it is a lot more environmentally friendly than driving a gasoline vehicle because the energy also comes from renewable resources.